Here's something that comes up in the humanities a lot, and it's the whole notion and idea of colonialism. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the history, obviously I have to a little bit. I'm going to talk more about the idea and what colonialism means. So what is colonialism? It's when you have a mother country that goes into another country and takes over. They want to get as much of the resources as they bloody well can, and they want to make use of the local population, either to turn them into its own citizens or to use them for labor. Very generally speaking, usually when we're talking about colonialism, we're talking about the European colonial period, which was roughly 1500 until the 1990s, although some people debate whether or not we're still in it right now. The example everyone always thinks of as a colonial power is Britain. The British Empire became the world's largest empire by going around the world and setting up colonies everywhere, from Australia to India, all over Africa, British Guiana and South America, and of course, Canada. Now, getting back to the idea of colonialism, it can basically be seen like a bad relationship. On the one hand, you've got this majority native population who is getting exploited mercilessly by the minority ruling class, a foreign power who is just going to take and take and take as much as it possibly can to feed its empire. Where this all gets complicated is during the Age of Discovery in the early 15th century, and even now, where you have competing colonial projects. It started out with Portugal and Spain sending out colonial projects, who eventually, of course, ran into the French and the British, everybody competing for different claims to land. Of course, you also had the native populations who just wanted to be left alone. So you had all these overlapping conflicts happening about who had a right to the land. But how do you justify a colonial project? Well, you write a lot of stuff down on a bunch of paper that says you're allowed to do it. Papal bulls are a perfect example. What that means is you get the Pope or someone else powerful to say that you can do it. Now, the way to expand an empire or colonial project is usually through large-scale immigration or resource exploitation. You can see this all throughout the colonial period, where settlers were sent out to basically take over a giant piece of land. But you don't just set up a colony anywhere. You want to go where there's resources, things that are useful, like coffee, bananas, sugar, wood. All of these different resources have shaped how colonial empires have decided to expand, and also what kinds of labor demands they would need. Essentially, would they need slaves or not? One of the difficulties in maintaining a colonial project is that eventually you have the populations mixing, and it's very difficult to maintain this idea of a ruling class, although to some degree, I guess colonialism always exists because you always have some segment of the population ruling other segments of the population and deciding what the culture is going to look like. This was especially true in colonial projects in the Americas, where the idea of castas was developed, and depending on who mixed with who, they tried to develop these insane and complicated different racial categories. So if we're talking about colonialism as the definition of a relationship between a majority and a minority invader, we can consider that we probably still live in a colonial period, and certainly colonialism happens every day all around us, and there's been colonialism in some form throughout all of human history. I encourage you that when you're studying things in the arts and humanities to always consider how this relationship between the controlling foreign power and the people that exist natively in that culture, how those two interact and how certain decisions are made based off of colonial ideas. Anyway, I hope that helps.